Hey Joe, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you, Aaron?
Yeah, I'm very good. I'm very good.
Thanks
It's a
for having me.
pleasure to be able to sit down and have a chat with you today. I always like to take it back to the start when everybody comes on the show and find out what was their first experience with horror or maybe even something scary. A lot of times I find the answer actually might not be a horror film. It could be a scene from a movie that was unintentionally scary or something like that, maybe.
Right. So I have a few different ones. For starters, the first cartoon that I ever remember my mom showing me when I was a little kid I'm sure it wasn't the first cartoon, but the one that I remember was The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. So that was sort of the Disney's Legend of Sleepy Hollow. That was sort of the first thing that kind of geared me in the direction. One of the things that I think happened when my brother and I were growing up was my mom was a single mom and she was going back to college, and so her boyfriend would watch us a bunch of times while she was at class. And he was like a stereotypical like military man where like, boys need to be raised tough to be like men and like that kind of thing. And so whenever we would kind of act up, he would hold us down in front of the TV and make us watch horror movies. And the first one that he made us watch was Nightmare on Elm Street. And yeah, and so I guess that's psychological torture. But but I was 5, and I think my brother was 7. And so my brother wound up not liking horror movies, but that was again another step in the direction of horror movies for me. And then the last one was I read in, I think in 7th grade, I read the Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None. And that just kind of was like, oh man, I want to be a storyteller. Like I want to work in horror and I want to tell stories. So kind of the combination of all plus a lot of other things going on in life.
Was it from that point, like from an early age, was horror always something that you were fascinated by, or did it I find some people, it scares them and they kind of go away and then come back around to it, or was it always in your life?
It was always in my life. Mystery and horror comedy were kind of the things that really worked for me. When I was younger, I was a performer and I was in a lot of sketch comedy groups. So for me, it was kind of the borderline of the horror and the comedy. And so when I was like maybe 13, I went back with one of my friends from high school and rewatched every movie that we were tortured with as kids. And like that was all the Nightmare on Elm Streets, Friday the 13th, Halloween's, Black Christmas, basically anything in the 80s. And I realized like a lot of it was funny, and it wasn't, or it was funny to me. It was campy and it was kind of silly. And then obviously when you get into the Evil Dead franchise, you see how ridiculous that is. So horror's kind of always had a little bit of a humor touch. Even the really scary stuff has a little bit of a humor touch to it. And for me, it's kind of like at the end of the day, I think it's amazing that myself and other filmmakers within the industry can make a movie on in essence a 2D screen, and someone can watch it and we can elicit the emotion of fear and make them terrified for their lives from something on. And to me, that's funny. So I kind of feel like it all kind of plays together. Ideally, I think me more kind of leaning more in the horror comedy realm was kind of what a lot of the things kind of taught me. But then as I got older and started working, kind of falling into a little bit more of the serious horror was where I went.
So you said you had that feeling where it was like, oh, this is somewhere I want to work. I want to work in movies. I want to work in horror. Um, when did it switch from that just being like a thought you had or a dream to like, okay, I really need to or have to make this a reality?
So I think the really I need to do this was probably when I was 24 years old. I had a grandfather who was in the army, and I had there was a lot of military, and so I had a very like I want to serve my country type mentality. And I wanted to work for the federal government, and I wanted to work for the FBI and the Secret Service and all that stuff. And basically, what happened to what's his name's character in Little Miss Sunshine, being partially colorblind and not being able to get into the Air Force. It was something similar that happened to me, and it sucked because I was like gearing up to be this whole like federal agent thing and like all the things that people see on TV. Like that's what I wanted to be. But my whole life prior to that, I'd always touched on the arts. I've always kind of gotten into it, and horror was always something that interested me. And every time I'd speak with someone, family wise, friends, or anything, people would always say, "Oh, we don't know anyone that does that. Like, you're never going to be successful in that. Like, go the federal route, go the federal route." So I pushed and pushed push. And once I got to the place where I was at the getting turned down at the federal route for color blindness, it was the first time that someone told me I can't do something because it's something I have no control over. And so I kind of got to this like place where I said, you know what, fuck it. I'm really tired. I'm sorry. Am I allowed to curse, by the way?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. I was like, fuck it. I'm so tired of people telling me what I can and can't do, should and shouldn't do. My whole life, I kind of grew up with people saying, you can't do this. You didn't have a father. You didn't have this. A lot of that shit. So finally, I just hit my like boiling point where I said, I'm going back to film school. I'm going to figure out whatever I need to figure out, and I'm going to make myself a filmmaker. And my mentality from then has carried it 15 years over to now as well, where whenever I figure out like, hey, I want to work with someone, I want to do this project, I want to figure something out. If it doesn't work out the way it's supposed to work out, I just bust my ass and figure out a way to make it work. And that's kind of been my horror background and what I've been trying to do in my career.
I feel like that's something that a lot of people struggle with that listen to my show, and I always get the same people come back and like, ask this filmmaker the same question, or ask that writer this question about the idea of. I think a lot of people maybe come up in those situations where, and a lot of times maybe family and close friends don't even realize what they're doing, or they're trying to steer you on like the sure path. And I feel
Right.
like the arts and a creative endeavor is always kind of seen as like, it's not really a real job though. It's not guaranteed.
Right.
And people get kind of anxious about like, their kids or grandkids or friends doing something like that. Was that something that you actively had to remind yourself of? Like, how difficult was that to have people maybe go, well, I know you like this and you feel like you love it, but don't do that, do this, and
Oh yeah.
make it work.
Yeah, 100%. I think one of the things that when I made my first movie, I remember telling people that I hadn't met, or people I would go to a party or somewhere, and telling people, especially when I would go back home, that I just made a movie, and they'd be like, "Oh, that's cute," or things like that, where they didn't really understand. Or the immediate thing that I would get is, "Oh, when's it going to be in theaters?" And it's like, "Oh, well, it's not. It's going to be
Mm,
on Amazon Prime." And it was like, "Oh, what's that?" Because it was the early days of
yeah.
Prime everything. And so, yeah, it's still you still get a lot of people that when you tell them what you do, they still to this day are like, oh, is that going to be in theaters or is that on Netflix, or you know what I mean? And not realizing that the world has changed significantly. But yeah, I mean, I think unless you come from a background of arts and have family members or people around you in the arts, or unless you live in an area like Los Angeles or New York where it's a very prominent place for the arts and for people to have
Mhm.
careers within those industries. I think a lot of people are sort of like, oh, that's just a pipe dream. Like, yeah, go figure that out. And then if it doesn't work out, what's the real job going to be? So that's kind of something you always have to fight against. Cause I always say to people, when people ask for advice or say, how did you make this? Or how did you figure out how to do this? I always say that this industry is, you just gotta, you gotta be okay with people telling you no and people telling you you're not good. Cause you're going to get, for every success story that you see, for every movie that you see come out, there's 100 more or 1,000 more or 10,000 more that filmmaker tried to make and people didn't give them an opportunity to make, or shut a door in their face or said no to them. You have to be resilient and you have to kind of really have thick skin, because that's the only way. The only way you will be a filmmaker, you will be a writer, director, producer, whatever, is if you keep going and you keep doing it. And I know nowadays a lot of people say, we have phones, we have a lot of technology that anyone can shoot something. It's the same thing. Like, you just got to create and you just got to make, and hopefully the money follows that and you can turn it into a career.
Would you say that's the difference between like the cream rising to the crop, so to speak? As in, some people I think get into these things thinking, "Oh, I wanna be like a film producer, I wanna be a director," and it's that very surface level, like, "Oh, I wanna be on, like, the red carpet, and I want people to
Oh
interview
yeah.
me, and I want it to be cool," versus somebody who's like, "Oh, I'm willing to eat shit, like, I'll live in my car for 10 years to make a movie, I don't care."
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, look at the Academy Awards. I mean, the Academy Awards are kind of the Super Bowl of film, and they rarely. I mean, The Substance got in, but they rarely let in horror. Like, horror is still kind of the redheaded stepsister that like doesn't get invited to the party, and we kind of have to create our own things because of it. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely, you're 100% right when that's exactly what it is.
Why do you think that is? I'm still fascinated by that question of why horror is kind of treated as like the redheaded stepchild still, even though it's like probably one of the bigger money makers. It's something that most companies seem to use as like a guarantee, as in money.
Yep.
It's hugely popular. The mainstream crossover is like probably better than any other subgenre. So
Right.
like I'm confused as to why it's still kind of treated as like the garbage.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I don't know the answer to that. I wish I did, but I think it has something to do with, you know, like take Terrifier for instance, in the Terrifier franchise. Um, it's a clown going around brutally murdering people. I don't think people want to admit that that's art. I don't think people want to, I mean, it is art, it's Art the Clown, but, you know, I don't think people want to admit that like brutally murdering someone or coming up with like cool and creative ways to like have some, like your killer kill someone. Like, I don't think people want to admit that that's art. And even now, I have a lot of friends that are, you know, were first time filmmakers in the last few years, and they wanted to write their drama or their psychological thriller or something that's like their thing, that their baby that they've wanted to make, and they haven't really had eyes on it. So they're like, I'm going to go make a horror film so that I can get a foot in the industry, and then I'll go do the thing that I want to do. And yeah, I mean, that usually pisses off a lot of us horror folks because we're like, yeah, we're trying to stay in this lane, not just get in and get out. But yeah, I don't know. I think probably fear has something to do with it, like being afraid of, you know, liking something that is morbid, liking something that kind of shows the darker side of things. I think one of the reasons why I've always loved horror and why I've always kind of like been interested in it is, you know, growing up and watching Disney cartoons and movies, that's not how real life is. Like I just told
Mm.
you, you know, I think in my career, I've made 9 or 10 feature films, and I've probably had 20,000 doors shut in my face. But that reality is, you know, things don't always work out. Things don't always go the way you want them to. Things that the happy ending where everyone sails off and like has everything like all rainbows and sunshines. That's not reality. That doesn't really happen. And I think horror kind of shines a light on that. And I think the things that I've heard from people is, oh, you're making content that's making people sad or making people feel angry or hurt. And like, why would you do something like that? But to me, it's like, it's just a movie. Like we're using this content to pull strong emotions out of people. And if we're doing that, we're doing our job. So I don't know is the long answer, short answer, but I feel like we should give ourselves more credit because there's a lot of movies, you know, if I can elaborate, I
Mhm.
think one of the reasons is because there's been kind of a change in the last 10 to 15 years of filmmaking because of streaming and because of content and how quickly things are made available. People's attention spans are changing. What we're seeing now in the industry is going through a ton of changes. It's been going through a ton of changes since COVID. The fires in Los Angeles didn't help. There's a lot of stuff that's kind of changing and making people realize they don't need to be in LA. They could be remote. They can do all of these different things. But I think one of the things that we're seeing a lot of, and you probably hear a lot of really famous directors saying this too, is it's no longer a filmmaker's medium. It's turning into a content creator's medium. And so what's happening is
Mm.
you're getting people that are churning out things really quickly, but it's like stuff that catches your attention, keeps your attention every 15 seconds, something new. And that's why when you say like the cream of the crop, I think over time, the cream of the crop does still rise and you actually see films that are really good. Because I think when you watch, especially in horror, if you watch a year of horror films, you can say, oh my God, this was amazing. This was amazing. This was amazing. But when you take a step back and look at the bigger picture, I actually think there's a lot less really good horror films, just like there's a lot less really good films out there, um, because everything is really copying off of something else, and everything's kind of taking, you know, an iteration from something from the 80s, the 70s, the 90s, and kind of moving everything around and just redoing it. So it's definitely an interesting time because a lot of, I think, hardcore filmmakers are seeing content creators get money for things because they know how to build brands and they know how to sell. And that's kind of what is getting the step in, is horror selling content. And I think over time, longevity, you'll see the filmmakers will actually be the ones that stay in it for a while. But yeah, it's just an interesting time in the industry for us. to kind of go through things, and horror is kind of that like stepping stone for every person to kind of get their thing seen.
I've always been fascinated by that, and I had seen a few years back there was a lot of people that would say things like, you know, content creators are going to be able to kind of take over the genre to a degree, and when you see some of these TikTok people, they're able to just like they just have this massive success and kind of nearly overnight following from like some of the stuff they create.
Yep.
Is there a place for that, do you think, in the genre? And is it something that's even worthwhile, or is it too fickle? It's just like the next thing, the next thing, the next thing.
I don't know. I don't ever want to say there's not a place for it. Like I'm one of those people, like a content creator having success in the film industry has nothing to do with me. So like it's like if they have success doesn't mean that I'm not going to have success. So I'm all about everyone having an opportunity and everyone doing something, and like really kind of being able to like grow within the industry. And we evolve as people, just filmmakers evolve the same way. And I think it kind of boils down to the type of films that you want to see. And I think the only downside with content creators is most of the stuff that they're making is for instant reaction. And the thing that we're missing a lot of times, especially with newer films, is you're missing the whole like slow burn, let it build, let someone sit with it for a little bit. And you want people to walk away from, whether it's their couch or this theater or whatever, you want people to walk away and sit down with another person and have a conversation about your movie. If it's like, oh man, that movie was cool, next, you're not really doing your job as a filmmaker. And so I think there is a place for that. But yeah, I mean, I'd be lying if I said a lot of those people are taking, a lot of funding away from filmmakers because they're able to build a brand. And kudos to them for doing that, because some filmmakers aren't able to build a brand, and some filmmakers aren't able to do this as easily as they are. And that's a craft in itself, to kind of build a brand and bet on yourself. And you're seeing a lot more of that. Like, how you were saying, people not really kind of knowing people in the arts and everything. It's more of nowadays, I feel like there's a lot more people that know people who are influencers and content creators and things like that. And there are people who are self-made and have millions of followers and built their own brand. So there's probably more of people being like, yeah, that's great. That's great. But I think the thing that I always want to make sure is there's definitely a difference between content and films. Very big difference. And they often get mixed between which one is which, and
Yeah.
one being the same as the other. And it's not the case all the time.
Before we get into specific projects, is it like, as somebody who has written, directed, produced stuff, the thing with all these streamers, like we have Shudder, we have, you've got AMC have their own thing. Everybody now seems to have like their own streaming platform and a place for movies and things to live. And I feel like that it can be maybe a minefield if you're trying to sell a movie or look for somewhere for a film to live, and it not just be, picked up in some sort of Netflix batch dump and just be like, just disappear into the ether. Is that something that you personally or professionally feel is like something that you have to be careful of? And if so, is there, I don't know, a way to utilize maybe some of this like influencer content creator thing to try and like I don't know, drive traffic to a project?
Yeah, and I have this conversation with friends. I was having this conversation with a buddy of mine, an actor, last night, about how I don't think a lot of filmmakers really want to go and like sell their brand and sell themselves. Like they're not in this industry for that. I do think there's definitely a place for that, but yeah, I mean, what's interesting with when we were younger, cable was a thing. Cable was a thing, and you'd have some movie channels and all that kind of stuff on it, but you were paying like $150 a month or something like that. We moved away from it into streaming, and then streaming was this, oh, you get the instant content right now, and you can watch the whole season, and so on and so forth. And now we're starting to see that there's so many individual platforms that you pay $10 here, $10 here, $10 here, $20 here, $15 here. By the end, if you're subscribing to all these platforms, you're paying $150 again a month. And now you have access to everything, but then it becomes the oversaturation of like, oh, what do I watch? So I think and then the other thing that's happening, which is you saw with Prime just did it. I know Shudder and AMC Plus does it. But now, and Tubi does it as well, but like ads. You're seeing ads come out. You're seeing ad revenue start getting brought back into this. And you're seeing a lot of platforms that you have to pay like an even higher fee if you don't want those ads. But it's kind of cyclical. Like we're kind of going in a circle and kind of going back to the same thing. But I really don't know what's going to happen. And if I had to guess, I feel like long term, a lot of the streaming platforms are going to go away, and there's only going to be like 3 or 4 major ones, and those will be kind of like the major networks that we had on television.
Yeah, and it's definitely, when I think back, you know, to years ago, and the idea of even going to like a video store, and I think a lot of people, that concept is lost on them, where you know you would rent a movie or 2 or 3 movies over the course of a weekend, and you were committed to, you were at least watching it from start to finish one time, if not multiple times, to feel like you got your money's worth. Whereas
Right.
now, and like coming from that era and to be where we are now, and like you said, like at my fingertips, I have basically every movie, every TV show I could ever want to watch. And the amount of times I sit down and I have like a little list on my phone of things, and then I just can't commit to anything.
Right.
It's like, well, I want to see this, and I want to finish it, and but it's like I want this, like I want to see it all now, and then I want to move on to the next thing, and I want to see that now as well, so I can have the conversation with somebody tomorrow about it. It's a strange, like, kind of arc we've made to come from that to like to the point where now you've got everything, and I'm paralyzed, and I don't watch any of it.
Right. Well, and the other interesting thing is there's a lot more podcasts. There's a lot more people like you who are creating content based on, interviewing, reviews, and all that kind of stuff too. And it kind of, again, it falls into the category of like, you're just watching stuff so that you can talk about stuff at times. And like, again, it loses the element of we're just going to sit back and enjoy something and kind of take it in and put our phones away and just be with something for 2 hours. But yeah, I mean, we're evolving, everything is evolving. So I'm sure it's not going to be cut and dry. I'm sure there's going to be kind of a mashup of things of how we get into the next phase of whatever happens in the industry.
A lot of people probably won't notice that are listening, and I feel like people throw around the word producer a lot, but it's kind of lost on them what it actually means to be a producer. They just think, well, you just kind of, I don't know, you just like pay for the movie, you just get the money. Like, how does that work? If you were to give it in like the simplest terms you could think of, what is the role of a producer, or at least in your case, when you step into a project in that role, what is it that you're actually looking to do?
So yeah, I mean, as you said, I've written, I've produced, I've directed, and I think the thing is, it's different with every project. I think the biggest misconception is people think that the producers are the ones who always bring the money, and that's not always the case, because there's like 100 different types of producers. Producers can get attached for different projects for different reasons. I would say that the thing that I always say is, there's technical producers and then there's creative producers. My role within horror and film has been more on the creative side of things. But what I would say is you have to believe in a story. Story is the number one thing that you're supporting, and story is the reason why you're getting involved. You believe in that story. And then I think what you do is, depending on if it's a writer director that's coming to you, or if it's a writer and they're looking for you to bring a director, I think the thing that I always say to people is I think a producer's job is to literally clear every single obstacle and hurdle for the director so that they can be able to tell the best version of the story that they can. And sometimes that means making sure that, you have permits for where you're going to shoot, making sure that you have, enough bathrooms on set, making sure that you're balancing the budget, making sure that you're creating the schedule with the assistant director. Sometimes it's those things, and sometimes it's sitting there at Video Village and giving a note to the director and saying, try it this way, or try it that way, or that was really good, what if you do this? And then seeing that actually winds up becoming the thing that's in the movie. So it's a lot of those different things. And I think for me, the other thing is, being a big part of being a producer is being in pre-production, production, and post-production. So pre-production is all the setup and getting yourself ready. Production is being that person on set that is clearing all the obstacles, but is also there and watching, monitor, and giving notes. And then in post-production, same thing, giving notes throughout the creative process of the edit, looking for partners, looking for distributors, bringing in the whole thing and trying to get the whole thing together so that you have an outlet for where your films can go.
Is there one that you prefer over the other between, writing, directing, producing, or do you just like a mixture of like being able to kind of wear many hats?
No, I mean, I like being able to wear many hats. And I think the way the industry is, I think you have to be able to wear many hats. I mean, a lot of actors, even nowadays, are getting into producing because they realize that they're sitting there waiting for a role, and that role is never going to come. They have to create the role for themselves. That's the world that we're in. No, I easily directing. Directing is by far. I'm a visual person. I love being able to craft the world that we're living in and build it up. And my favorite thing in this world is working with actors. I love that especially when I write something, but even if I don't write something, even if it's something that I've fallen in love with and I read and I want to work with the writer, there's something fascinating to me about getting something from the page, interpreting it, giving it to an actor, working with them, shooting it on set, editing it, and then seeing that idea or that piece of paper, that thing is now like alive and breathing. And so many people put their hands on it. The costume department, production design, the actors, wardrobe, makeup, all of these people are like contributing to this thing that was at once an idea in your head or a piece of, some words on a piece of paper. That's the most fulfilling and fascinating thing. The hardest thing with that, though, is sometimes the things don't go the way you want them to, and sometimes they go exactly the way you want them to. So, and when they don't go the way you want them to, sometimes it's really good, and sometimes it's really bad.
I've actually done that once or twice where I've sat down with a screenplay in front of me and then tried to watch the movie and kind of, I wouldn't say word for word or beat for beat follow along with the screenplay, but try to see like how it translated from a page
Right.
to actually seeing and how that process must work. Um, and it's kind of a fascinating thing, and a lot of filmmakers I've talked to have said like that horror can actually be one of the more challenging genres to pull off effectively.
100%.
Even though, like you said, everybody kind of uses it as like the, oh well, I guess I'll do a horror movie to get my foot in the door because that's like the no brainer. But would you agree with the fact that to do it correctly, it's probably one of the most difficult genres? And if so, is there anything like for you personally that has stuck out as like a moment where you were like, yeah, this is exactly what I was talking about?
Yeah, I mean, you're 100% correct. Like the thing is sometimes a really good writer will write a script without saying where to put the camera, and as a director, you'll be like, I know exactly where to put the camera based on the way the script is written. But even when it's not written that way, there's 100 different ways to interpret a scare sequence, and horror films are littered with scare sequences. So, and I think you see, like when you see the machine work and you see certain companies and certain people that come from the same background, when you see their movies versus people they worked with, whatever, it's the same scare sequence. It's the same way they're shooting it. It's a lot of the recycled commercial look of things. But I think that interpretation is what sets apart, someone who's really good at what they're doing and someone who's kind of falling into that. You can still have a really good career falling into that generic kind of commercial world. But I think the really good directors out there are the ones that really understand how to kind of maneuver the camera the best to get a performance or something out of that.
I know you've probably been asked questions about the Hell House franchise a million times, but for maybe someone who's listening to this for the first time and who doesn't know, how did you first come to be involved on that? Because I think now it's probably lost on a lot of people again how, it started as this thing and now it just seems like this huge entity within the horror community. But, back then I'm sure it wasn't that. It was a core group of people that got together and had a passion for something.
Yeah, so I was directing my first feature, and I was preparing for it in 2013, and I had a friend. His name's Adam. He played Mac in the original Hell House, and he came to me and said, "Hey, I have a friend who's looking for a producer. Do you know anyone in horror that would be interested?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'd be interested." And he's like, "Well, I thought you were going to go direct your thing," and I was like, "Yeah, but like more the merrier. Like let me get involved in this." And so he introduced me to Stephen Cognetti. And so at that point in 2013, Steve had already written the script as a narrative film. changed it to a found footage film, and then found the location that he wanted to shoot it at. He just didn't really know a lot of the technical aspects. So like when he and I partnered up, a lot of that first project was me bringing on the crew, me hiring the right technical people, making sure we had a good cinematographer, a good production designer, and bringing in those elements. And then really kind of getting on set. And a found footage movie is always shot a little bit different. People think it's easier, and there are elements of found footage that are easier, but there's also elements of found footage that make it significantly difficult, because you always have to justify where the camera is. And so it was kind of a like not. I don't want to say experimental, but it kind of feels like an experimental thing. And I remember Steve being like, "We're going to make the next Blair Witch," and I remember people rolling their eyes and all that kind of stuff. And you know, it was a small crew. It was about 10 people total. We had the 5 main cast. The main cast were incredible. To me, the reason why that movie stands out and why that movie stands the test of time in terms of what is scary, especially within the other 4 movies that we've made, is because that cast was absolutely believable and 100% like you believed everything that those people said. And so, yeah, so Steve brought me on, we worked on it, and then, you know, we made it, and I think we got it on Prime. But it was a different time back then. It came out in 2015. And I don't think we really even started getting like the word of mouth about it until 2017 or 2018. We'd already made the second one, and we're in the process of making the third one when we started seeing like very well-known filmmakers like Scott Derrickson, Mike Flanagan, like making comments on social media about it in a positive light. And then seeing other people kind of, you know, and it's the internet, you know, for every person that says you did a really good job, there's 10 more that said you guys still suck. I don't understand what everyone's saying here. But it was word of mouth. And then kind of over time, you know, more and more, Steve and I would see that the more we did these movies, the more we would be on those lists of like top 10 scariest movies, or it's Halloween time, make sure this is on your list, and like those kinds of things. So I think Steve would say he always saw this coming. I definitely didn't see it coming. And I wasn't even a big fan of found footage when I first got involved. When I first got involved, the only 2 real found footage movies that I saw were Blair Witch and Paranormal Activity. And I didn't like Blair Witch, and I loved Paranormal Activity. And then I immersed myself in the genre. I really kind of got involved in it and started watching everything that I can. And, you know, to this day, I've much bigger background in terms of making a bunch of found footage movies. I even directed a documentary about the making of the Paranormal Activity franchise. So I think, yeah, it was really like kind of small boots on the ground, little group that kind of goes out and makes this film. And it's kind of turned into a cult film that I think, you know, every year there's people that are like, I've never heard of that movie. And people are like, go watch it. So we're grateful for that too.
Yeah, that's the thing I love about the horror community as well, that I feel like sometimes if a movie on initial release doesn't get its dues, the horror community at some point will find it and like bring it back to its former glory. Um, what was it? So you said that you felt like it didn't really pick up steam till maybe 2-3 years after you'd released, and you'd already made the second one. What was it about it that you guys decided to even continue and sequelize it before it kind of hit its online boom, or whatever you want to call it?
Right. So Steve had always envisioned a trilogy. So he always had a 3-part series that he wanted to write. So I think, you know, and this is credit to him, because when we released the movie in 2015, he was already in the process of writing the next one. And I remember being like, do you want to do something different? And he's like, no, I want to tell this story. And I remember being like, okay, like, let's not just churn out the next thing. Like, let's slow down, let's figure out. And he was like, no, I want to get this out. I want to get this out. And to his credit, he was right, because I think him getting it out, I mean, listen, I'll be the first one to say, so will he. There is an order to the movies in terms of which ones are the better ones and which ones are not the better ones. And I think the ones that we're talking about right now are the ones that kind of maybe you can watch second or third and are a little bit lower on the list. But I think it generated word of mouth, because then it was like, oh, this movie's coming out. Oh shit, I haven't even heard of the original. Let me go back and watch the original. And it was a lot of that kind of stuff, because then we had a relationship with Terror Films, and Joe Dane over there was really great to us. And then we connected with Shudder, and Sam Zimmerman, and they were really great to us. And we kind of started building this thing that we didn't realize how big it was going to get. And it's been big and really, yeah, it's going really, really well.
It is, because it's like, as well, it kind of feels like you guys have been able to like almost reverse engineer in a way. Like it's gotten, normally when something gets sequels, eventually over time it kind of starts to like disappear, and then I don't know, the franchise or people realize, oh, maybe there's not really a want for it anymore. But you guys have seemed to have went from like strength to strength, to start off kind of slow, then it finds itself online and starts to get popular, and then as the sequels have come out now, it seemed to have gotten like more and more appreciated as they go on.
Yeah, and I think the fourth one, the one that we came out with last year, Hell House LLC Origins, the one that we kind of concentrated on the clown, that one did really well, and we've had an amazing cast throughout the entire thing, the entire run. But I think usually in a franchise, you don't usually see, like, it's usually like, okay, the first one's the best one, second one's the second best, maybe the fourth is the third best, and then the fifth, and then maybe the third, or something like that. I think up till present day, I think the fourth one is the one that comes closest to the first one. And I think that we finished the trilogy and we were kind of done with this. And then a few years later, we went back to it. And I think with fresh eyes, coming back to it and talking through what we wanted to do, I think we kind of got another chance to kind of show everyone, like, hey, the first one wasn't just, us getting lucky. And I think that's what did it. And now that we have the fifth one that's coming out at the end of this year, we're doing that narrative as opposed to found footage. And believe me, we've had the conversations where it's like, we might alienate some found footage fans, but I think for us, it's always trying to try new ways of doing the scares and getting a little bit more creative. And we think that this one's going to be one that the fans are really going to love.
And it's funny as well, because I'm a huge found footage guy and always have been, but people have always given me shit about that. And I feel like it's scary territory in a way, I think, for somebody to get into making a movie found footage. And especially at the time, you guys kind of reinvented the wheel in a way, and like made found footage kind of cool again, and got back at the kind of pinnacle of that. And it felt like all these other movies were kind of being made just as like oh, I want to make my Hell House. I want to like, put a
Yeah,
stamp
we
into that.
definitely came in a period where everyone was trying to do Paranormal Activity. Everyone was trying to take Paranormal Activity to the next level. But I don't know. You might know this better than I do. I'm pretty sure we're coming out with our fifth. I don't know many found footage movies that got to a fifth aside from Paranormal Activity.
No. Is
Right?
the VHS? I don't know if they have
VHS is probably the only
the
one.
only other one, if you
VHS is one
consider
because
that.
they keep changing the genre that they're
Yeah,
working in.
that's
Um,
probably it. And what made the decision then for you guys to go, um, like, fully narrative then on this one? Was it just time to kind of pack away the found footage?
I think so. Yeah, I think I mean a combination of really wanting to challenge ourselves and do something a little bit different, but also it's exhausting. Like you know what I mean. We both of us, Steve and I, keep getting known as, like, I get scripts sent to me every week of people asking me to produce their found footage movie, and it's like it's not that we were using found footage as a stepping stone, but after 4 movies, we both want to make other movies, and we both want to make other things outside of Hell House as well, and we both want to grow and continue to do this within the industry that's been kind to us. But I think in growth, we don't want to just keep doing the same thing over and over again. And I think hitting the fourth one on a high note, our worry is, the first one was really good. The second one didn't do so well. And like, our worry is we have to justifying why these people are going to this place, why after numerous people are getting killed and murdered, and why are these people continuing to go over and over and over again? And I think when we decided to switch into narrative, the script that Steve wrote kind of shifted a lot of things. So it's less about why are these people doing this stupid thing over and over again, and it's more about something coming after them as opposed to them going toward the thing. And narrative really had helped. The narrative style of filmmaking has really helped us shift that, so it's not just same old people showing up at a house that they shouldn't be at.
Yeah, I love that, and I definitely do think though that you guys were really successful in being able to make found footage scary again. Like, as a fan, I've always watched found footage, but I would just watch it kinda more for the sake of it. A lot of
Yeah.
times it wasn't really that scary to me, and the Hell House franchise has kind of felt like, it's kind of felt like it's captured that little glimmer of, like, Blair Witch feel where I'm like, I can kind of buy into, like, all of this,
Yeah.
I can obviously, with a movie, you always kinda have to do that anyway, but, like, I really felt like that when I would watch it, it would kinda take me into that place of like, "You know what? I'm actually kinda believing this is, like, pretty real somehow, even
Right.
though it's modern day." Like, it's not that was the beauty, I guess, of Blair Witch back in the '90s. They had the thing that, people didn't have smartphones, people didn't have the internet and at readily available, whereas you guys had all this other stuff to contend with. Like, I mean, everybody can just fact check everything, ruin everything, like, at an instant.
Yep.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And listen, I think Steve has figured out a way to kind of try to make scares a little bit different every time, and I think that's something that he's been good at doing. I mean, since the second movie, I've been playing the clown too. So I've been able to bring a little bit of my personality to the role, even though the role is a mask and you don't actually see the personality. So there's definitely been a lot of things that I think we've tried to find more joy in as we've continued to do these things and have fun with them. And like I said, I think this new one that we're coming out with at the end of the year, I think it's definitely going to be a different, in a good way. But I think, we still might have people that are the diehard found footage people that will be like, we wish you would go back to do found footage or something like that.
will this be the end of the franchise? Is this kind of like the end cap on it, or could potentially people expect to see more?
This is the end in terms of the way that we're making these movies. We've been making these movies kind of just the two of us and with a small crew and kind of putting things together. I'm not going to say, like, I think Steve came out publicly and said, this is the last one forever. That's not like, it's not going to be the last one forever. I mean, if someone comes along and is like, hey, like we tried to make after the third movie, we tried to make the Abaddon tapes, which was like a prequel series that we wanted to do. And we've made these movies for roughly 50 to 100K each. We wanted to make the Abaddon tapes for like $5 million, and no one wanted to give us the money to do that. If someone comes along and is like, hey, we actually see your brand, we see what you guys built, we love this, here's what we want you to do, I can guarantee you that if there's a way that we can be a little bit more creative, throw more narrative into it, something like that, and we had the budget to tell the stories the way we wanted to tell the stories. Like, we've always wanted to talk more about Tully and the cult in the 70s and the 80s. We just never had the money to make a period piece and actually like go back in time without people being like, that car is not from 1980, that thing's not from 1980, that phone's not. So we never really had that opportunity. I think if we had that opportunity, sure, never say never. But I think we're both kind of ready to shut the door on this and say this is the last one that we want to do. Did I lose you? Sorry, I think I lost you for a sec.
Oh, I think we froze completely on my side.
All good. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, 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 perfect. Yeah, I think that was on my side, sorry.
No worries. Did you lose me in there?
No, it got right, like, towards the end. I can cut that piece anyway, it doesn't really matter.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, on Hell House, then to kind of finish up, I guess uh, that portion of, like, your career and your work, you feel like that maybe it's better after this one to kinda leave it alone and maybe see where things fall? It was there ever, I'd seen people talk about, maybe rebooting the series, but do you feel like maybe people are too quick to do that? Like, something gets popular on, like, maybe a smaller budget with a small crew, and then, like, the quote unquote "big guns" want to come in and go, "Okay, we're gonna give you $10 million and we're just gonna completely rehaul everything."
I mean, that's what they wanted to do with the original Paranormal Activity, and Oren Peli and Jason Blum said no and stuck to their guns on that, and that's why that movie is so much better than what they would have made. Yeah, I mean, I think after the third one we had a nice step back because I think we made the first one in 2014, we made the second one in 2016, and we made the third one in 2017, and then we made the fourth one in 2020. Yeah, and it came out in 2023, or we made it in 2023 and it came out in 2023. So we had like 6 years, or 5 years in between that. And I think this is probably, you never want to say never. And that's the thing. I know everyone wants to say like, take Steve's word for like, we're never going to do this. We're never going to do this. Never say never, because you never know what could come back. But I think we're both pretty confident that at least for a decent amount of time, like we're prepared to step away from this and move on to other things in our careers.
From I guess a leisure and like a personal standpoint, are you a fan of like Halloween attractions or like haunt attractions and things like that?
So I am. It's hard to scare me though. Like it's really, really like I'm one of those people that it's really, really difficult to scare me. So I usually go with people who get really scared because I think that's funny to watch them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm also one of those people that what's it, McCamey Manor,
Yeah.
the one where they torture people. Like I
Yeah.
want to go to that. I've never.
Yeah.
I want to go do something like that. Like everyone that's like you have to sign a waiver. I'm like, sign me up. That's what I want to do. But I think the older I get, the more I'm probably not gonna do that kind of stuff.
Is that ever something that you guys would entertain, or anybody do you collaborate or work with, or even just yourself? The idea of, I feel like that question gets asked a lot when people are involved in certain IPs or just in horror in general. The crossover to like some sort of an attraction based thing, or using the IP for maybe a theme park or places like that.
Yeah, I mean, we're open to all of that kind of stuff, but we've always been operating as a small team doing this kind of stuff. So that would have to be, we'd have to have bigger partners and more people involved in making stuff like that happen. Because as much as we'd like to do it, if we did take on a venture like that and no one else was helping us, then that would be our full-time job and we wouldn't be making films anymore. So I feel like we'd have to find the right partner and find the right people that want to do that. We've already had conversations with people at different conventions and things asking us if we can do like we were asked to do a haunted maze at Midsummer Scream next year or this year. But again, things didn't work out. So there's always, again, my belief is never say never, because you never know when things are going to come back around and it's going to make sense. So I'm leaving the door open, but I think for fans, I think they should expect that this is going to be the last one for a while.
Is there a kind of a juxtaposition between um being pigeonholed into, like, you become like the Hell House guys,
For
and
sure.
everybody kind of wants that again and again, but then also, I mean, I don't know if the other aspect of it is, somebody gets to see that work and go, "You know what? I actually really like that," and then maybe approaches you and goes, "Well, I wanna see what else you guys have got." Is there a weird kind of, you
Yeah.
know
I mean, historically in this industry, in the past, you've heard that people are like, oh, what else do you have? What else do you have? What else do you have? But in the last 10 years, it's been less of that. And it's been more of, let's do the same thing. Let's do the same thing. People want the same thing. Let's get more of that. Um, Creatively, it's not fun. Creatively, you always try to find different ways to challenge yourself and tell your story the best you possibly can. But I think yeah, I think we're both ready to take on new challenges and like, yeah, you get pigeonholed. I mean, listen, at the end of the day, we are a part of a franchise that took off and people love. And so we have a fan base that we love every single one of our fans. We love doing podcasts and talking to people like you. We're a big word of mouth film. So anyone who talks about us, we're so grateful for the fact that they're even bringing up the films and wanting to discuss them with us. But yeah, I mean, it's just sometimes it's just you can't, like I said, I get found footage scripts sent to me all the time. We do get pigeonholed, and I think it sometimes takes us saying this is the last one or this is we're done or whatever to move on and try new things and do new things and move into other areas. So that's what we're gonna do.
Is there a specific subgenre or a specific story or a narrative that you personally would like to tell next, or it sits atop, like, your list of, "This is kinda what I wanna do"?
Yeah, so I mean, I have a ton. I mean, I have so many different things. There's two movies that I'm in the one I'm writing and one I'm in the process of making offers to actors. One of them kind of falls in the vein of like a lot darker into that kind of not Hell House, but taking on a little bit of the supernatural and bringing it into the slasher world. So That's one of the ones that I'm really excited for. But the other one, the one that I'm writing, is I directed a movie called Another Cabin in the Woods movie, and it was sort of a satirical take on Cabin in the Woods movies. And I am writing a sequel to that one. And that one has been a little bit more on, I've been leaning more on the, scary movie, Wayne's Brothers, Leslie Nielsen, Zaz, Naked Gun, Airplane, and kind of a lot of the comedy stuff that I had a lot of my roots in, and utilizing that to sort of retell a story that is, my whole thing is I want my stories to be original, but I want to play with the tropes of the genre. So that seems like something that hopefully I'll be able to do this year, and we'll see. I don't think Another Cabin in the Woods movie did particularly well, but I had so much fun making that movie, so I kind of want to do that.
Is there I guess not a decision you have to make, but does it get hard to go between, I hear about people that want to do independent only because you get to be creative, you get to do those things that you might not normally get to do. You get to get those creative juices flowing in the way that you might like, versus maybe if you get locked into a bigger studio picture, you kind
Yeah.
of within the confines of like, well, this is the way we want it, Joe, and this is the way it has to be, and it doesn't really matter what you think per se, just make this.
Well, fortunately, all of the movies I've made have been in the independent realm. And I say fortunately because obviously financially, it would have been more fortunate if I made studio films, because I'd have a lot more money than I do now. But the thing is what you just said comes along with that. And I think because the reason why I love indie horror and the reason why I love independent filmmaking is because a lot of times there's not many voices in the room making the creative decisions. When you do, at least historically, when you do work into the studio system, there are a lot more voices involved. And if you are not used to the system or not a part of the system, you can kind of get your idea and everything kind of taken away from you, and things change, and it has to be something that you don't want it to be. I think one of the things that I think a lot of people fall into the trap is they make movies because they think they'll do well. Like, they make a movie because the
Mm.
topic is trendy, or because something is like, everyone's watching these types of movies, so I'm going to make this movie because then people will be like, that's smart. I think the thing that I've learned in my career is, when you're making a movie, especially a horror movie, you got to make something that you would want to see. You got to make something that you care about, because the thing that we forget about a lot of this is, I'm a huge fan of horror films as well. I'm a huge fan of all films as well. So when I sit there and watch a lot of things and see what's piquing my interest, like if I'm writing and working on set and doing all this stuff, and then I have, some downtime, what am I watching? Like, what are the things that I'm searching for? And I'm like, oh, this is keeping my interest. So I think a lot of times people tend to fall into, especially in the last 10 years, people fall into the trends of what's the next thing, what'll sell, what's this. And I think if you really want to get to the like crux of like what the best art is and what the best movies are, it's when someone tells a story that they want to tell and that they would watch themselves.
Is that difficult then if you're writing a project? Because I've heard this a few times from people about you kind of in a way can't write about things that you think are trendy right now, because by the time you actually get into the meeting or into a position where it's going to get put into practice,
Right.
it will seem like, oh, that was like 5 years ago. Like, you're talking like, if you make references to, I don't know, a certain TikToker, for example, and
Right.
then like, if your project doesn't get made for 6 years and they're like, what's TikTok?
Yep. Yeah,
That's
exactly.
difficult
I
when
mean,
you're
that's
writing
the
a
problem.
story.
There's I think Robert Eggers has said that he's never going to make a movie that's not a period piece, because he doesn't want to deal with social media. Like, I would love to do that, but he has bigger budgets on the movies he works on than I do. But yeah, I mean, that is 100% an issue, because when you do start chasing trends, I mean, there are people who wanted to make movies about MySpace, and by the time they made the movies, MySpace didn't exist anymore. So, that is a challenge, and that is something that you will run into if you're chasing trends.
Is that what was so special about the likes of the 80s and 90s? And I always kind of harken back to them. It's probably because I grew up in those times, but um where a lot of the movies feel like they're kind of timeless. Like a lot of John Hughes stuff I can watch and I can show my kid it, and it doesn't feel as like old fashioned, if you
Right.
want to call it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think even the 70s, I think, especially in horror, you're right. John Hughes and other genres it works as well, but especially in horror, it was more of an experimental period. So, like a lot of the times when you're doing special effects and you're doing puppets and you're doing creature creations, it's people who had no idea what they were doing and they were just kind of figuring it out. And then when you saw it come together, it was like, holy shit, I've never seen that stuff before. So I think that that's one of the reasons in horror. And yeah, I think the amount of movies being made in 1981 compared to 2025, vastly different. Like I remember a time when I was, similar to you, like I would go to Blockbuster, or I'd go to the video store, I'd go and it'd be like, what's the new release this week? And I even remember movie theaters, like you would look and there'd be like one horror movie, one drama movie, and maybe one comedy movie coming out this week. And it's like different people will go see whatever fits their thing. But now it's like, how many movies are getting released every week? Like I can't even keep track of and that's where again, I think there's so much content being made, but sometimes even really good films are not being seen because there's so much stuff on top of it. And there's brands and there's content creators and all this other stuff. So sometimes there are definitely filmmakers who have gone without having an audience or having people see their movies and have probably burnt out and quit because they didn't think they were good anymore because no one watched their movies, when in fact they were really phenomenal filmmakers. And unfortunately that happens.
From a from a career standpoint, professionally then, and I guess in your producer role more than anything, how do you actively fight against that? Like, what can you do? I feel like what you're doing right now is probably one of those things. Is I think when people see the real people behind a project and that they're actually fans themselves and that they actually care, it's not just, oh, well, I'm just making this movie because I just want to, like, I don't know, scam people out of money, and I just want to like pick the next thing that seems cool. When I think when people see there's an actual passion, a care, an interest, that's probably key. But is there anything that you would say personally that you feel like is something you can do when you're working on a project to avoid your projects? Because I've heard of it so many times, guys might sign something and it gets distributed and then it gets picked up and it's like, "Oh yeah, by the way, we forgot to tell you, your movie is dropping with like 18 other movies, across
That
all
happens.
these different things." And yeah, like nobody's gonna ever know about it. And it's really unfortunate sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the company that's making all of the like Steamboat Mickey and Popeyes and all that kind of stuff, I worked with them once before, and I remember them telling me like, "Hey, this is what we're going to do. We want to do this. Would you have any interest in this?" And I didn't. But they're really successful at it, and people are watching it, and people are loving it, and everyone. There's I don't think because the thing is this is why I say don't make a movie when you're trying to follow a trend, because trends change. Trends change, people change, everyone evolves. If you're chasing that, your movie might be good for a year, but then like again, like when you like I was saying earlier, if you go back and look at all of the great horror films over the course of history, and then you go back and look at all of the great horror films over the last 2 or 3 years, maybe two of them are in that category. Like it's not like when we put the focus on certain things. Like one of the things that I'm a pretty harsh person when it comes to this. I appreciate what everyone does. I know everyone like I have so much respect for people who put time and effort into things because, like you said, passion. When I see someone make a movie and I don't think the movie's good, there's a lot of people who put years of their life into that and are passionate about that. And maybe it didn't come out the way they did, or maybe they did, and my taste is just different than theirs. But it's really, really challenging to sort of figure out how to navigate that. And I think that's part of the evolution of filmmaking, is as I would say the evolution of any trade or any industry, is you do have to sort of change how you do things. You do have to adapt a little bit, because if you don't, you're probably going to get left in the dust.
Yeah, it's like, it feels like we're in like a kind of a weird time, and I know who I think it's, ITN Distribution, I think is who you're referring to, and it was something I was gonna, 'cause I guess I know some of the guys over there, and I've talked to some of the guys making some of those movies, and, like, I get what they're doing, but again, it's like, it's that thing where now it's not only them in that game either. There's, like, other companies, and there's even other companies, like, there's multiple companies in the UK that
Right.
are, like, all bouncing that same, public domain ideas off of each other, and I'm like, I don't know how much that helps the
Well,
genre and the industry.
truthfully, I think Terrifier 2 and Terrifier 3 really kind of changed things for everyone because it was, like you're not going to a Terrifier movie to see amazing cinematography and really good story, really good character work. You're going to see the kills. Like you're going to see the insane kills. You're going to see the craziness. You're going to see all of that stuff. Um, I think what Damien Leone did was show the industry that people are interested in certain things like that, and that there are people. And I think that not only like I think the because what was the first one that they did? Was it was the Pooh one, right? The Winnie the Pooh
Yeah,
one,
yeah.
Blood and Honey. Yeah. So I don't think that movie did very well, but I think after seeing what happened with Terrifier 2 and Terrifier 3, that IP thing was able to kind of take advantage of a lot of the Art the Clown stuff. And I think that's what you're seeing is you're starting to see a lot of these movies where Terrifier 3 was in theaters and made like $80 million, at least in the US. I don't know what it did globally, but it showed that like people want to see gore and people want to see slashers and people want to see like gross stuff. And I think that helped that other group of people who were kind of making the like the things that were no longer or that are now public domain and kind of taking them and kind of making them awful horror movies. I mean, listen, half of the great horror movies of the 90s and the 2000s are based on children's like stories or children's tales, like the Pied Piper and things like that. So I think it's just, again, doing the same thing, taking Disney, taking, Warner Brothers or all these other characters and kind of, now that they're public domain, kind of turning them into these villainous things. There's,
It
there's an audience for it, man.
Yeah, it's funny, right? Because it's like, before you would have your, I don't know if you call them triple A kind of labels, and they would make movies, and then, you would have your kind of lesser that or lesser than to a lot of people, and they would make these kind of B movies. And now it's like we have guys making these movies, and then like you've got the next guy down is like trying to make their version of that movie as well at the same time that
Right,
that's being made. So it's like,
right,
we've like two different versions of like Piglet and two different versions of this
right.
character. And I'm like, I can't keep up with it. But look, I guess there's obviously some form of audience out there for it. If you could if you could step in and get involved in an existing IP, not a creation of your own, and I know a lot of times anyone who's in the arts or in a creative endeavor would rather do their own stories. But if
Mhm.
it was an existing horror IP or a franchise or a book, anything, even if it's not been done before, is there something that sticks out in your mind as like, I'd love to give my take on that?
Yeah. And then there were none, and The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, both of them.
That
I
was a really quick answer.
Oh, I've known this for. I mean, there's another one, but I don't say it publicly because I don't want anyone to do it. Those two, I mean, they've done multiple iterations of Sleepy Hollow. I think they're in the process of writing another one. And then there were none has had so many iterations. But I think I could do a good job with both of those.
Do you spend a lot of time, I don't know, seeking out things to option or, looking for books or comics or anything like that?
When I was younger, I did. I don't do that at all anymore. Like I'm more of an original content starting from scratch. And I know that there is a good game. Like people have done that and have found a lot of success in like finding the right thing at the right time. But books, it's the same thing as films. There's so many books out there. It's like there's thousands of like murder mysteries and things out there. And I feel like you fall into the same trap with like how many times do you have 2 hours to watch a movie and you're an hour in and you're still trying to figure out what the movie is that you're watching. I'm the same way with books. It's like you go and you're looking, like I'll go to a Barnes and Noble and I'll look, and I'll like an hour later, I'll be still looking at all of the books because all of them sound interesting to me. So I kind of try to stay away from that kind of stuff. I feel like I feel like the reason why I got into this industry is because I know I have some interesting stories to tell, and I know that I would enjoy seeing these things, and I know there's people like me out there that would enjoy seeing my take on these things. So I haven't. I'm sure if I find it very financially successful or I land one, I'm gonna change my opinion on this. But as of this point, like I'm not actively seeking that stuff.
Obviously, and I kind of probably already know the answer to this question, seeing as you're a professional. But is there a difficult choice you have to make? You know, when projects that you're involved in kind of start to hit and make noise, and people are talking about them a lot, and I don't know, then maybe you're feeling meetings with different companies and different places and filmmakers and whatever. Um, I feel like in that position that I would be like, uh, maybe for want of a better word, get tricked into like accepting like the next deal. Like someone's like, "Oh, well, you know, you were great at this, so here's the option for you now. You've got first choice on this." Um, is there a kind of a period where you kind of have to kind of, okay, I got to take a deep breath now because there's like offers coming in, and I need to categorize where these actually sit?
Yeah, I mean, I, I I think I've changed a lot in the last 5 years. I think earlier it was like all of that stuff was like a lot of the same stuff coming in. Like I still do get people asking me if I would produce found footage films for them, but I think I've gotten to a place where I really like. I'll say this: I'm not at a place in my career where I can sit there and be like, I'm going to choose that over that or that or that. I'm not at that point in my career yet. Like I still am like actively seeking many opportunities and many jobs and many roles and many things. But I think you do, the older you get and the more experience you get, the more you will find people giving you advice and saying, at some point, you have to be selective. You can't just say yes to everything. And I think there was a period when I said yes to everything. And, you know, the reason why I did Hell House was because I wanted to say yes to anything, and it opened up this whole world for me that I didn't even know existed. But if someone came to me today and wanted me to do something that's similar, like I probably would say no to it, because I've done that and I've worked in that. And like, and again, back to the whole point of why Steve and I are moving on from this is I went from not being a huge found footage fan to being immersed in it and really loving the genre and really understanding it and really appreciating it. And then documentary about, and both of them, like it's a lot of stuff. So it's like I want to move on. I want to do something different. I want to, and so yeah. So you have to be selective, and you have to get to the point where it's like choosing is the way to go, and finding something that fits what you want to do next and what you think is the next challenge. Well, is what you really should try to do, in my opinion, at least.
I have a couple of short questions I'd like to ask you before we finish up, but just to touch on something you mentioned earlier about obviously, you know, you wrote and directed the documentary about the making of Paranormal Activity. How did that come about? And like you said, you know, to have that be a movie that when you saw it you loved, and then to kind of go full circle, and then you're making your own documentary about the making of that film.
Yeah, you know what's crazy? So I find it fascinating that whenever people prior to Hell House would ask me what my favorite found footage movie is, I didn't have a lot of experience in it, but I would always say Paranormal Activity was phenomenal. Like I loved that movie. What they did to me, I always say Paranormal Activity did what Nightmare on Elm Street did for slashers. Is they took something that was made with Blair Witch, but it was in the woods. It was away. It was you had to go seek it out to be scared, and they brought it into your home. And I think Nightmare on Elm Street did the same thing. Is they took it, if you weren't related to the person like in Halloween, or if you weren't in the cabin in the woods like Jason or Mrs. Voorhees, but you had to sleep, and everyone has to sleep. And I think Paranormal Activity changed that and made everyone scared of being in their own home. So that to me was kind of like the mecca. And I find it fascinating that if you go buy a box set of all of the Paranormal Activity films, my documentary is a part of that. Like that's insane to me.
I'm literally looking at it right now. It's sitting
Yeah,
there.
the posters behind me.
Uh,
So basically, that movie came along because I had been friends. I was one of the guys that I'd known from film school is friends with Anthony Massey of Massey Media. And Anthony had produced a lot of the making of type movies. Like he did the 25-year anniversary for Halloween. He did Still Screaming, which is the first 3 Scream documentary. He did a Hellraiser one. He did a Psycho one. He did a Friday the 13th one called His Name is Jason. So he was kind of like that guy who did those things. And him and I became friends, and I went to shoot the 3rd Hell House movie. And he told me that one of his friends lives near where we were shooting in Pennsylvania. And he's like, if you ever need a hand or want, whatever, give him a call. And so I did. And this guy, his name's Nate Reagan. He's like the #1 guy for anything Scream. He came and I brought him on set. I showed him around and he helped us with a couple sequences. And then afterwards he was like, hey, he's like, you write and direct too, don't you? And I was like, yeah. I was like, it's primarily what I do. I kind of fell into the producing thing. And he was like, did Anthony ever talk to you about the Paranormal Activity doc that we were thinking about doing? And I was like, yeah. I was like, he told me. And basically the reason why they decided to do it was because Nate's son watches horror movies with him. And Nate's, after they watch the horror movies, they put on all the special features and watch how they were made and do all that kind of stuff. And when they got finished watching Paranormal Activity, his son was like, can we watch the behind the scenes? And he was like, there actually aren't any. And he like looked it up and he's like, yeah, there's nothing anywhere about this. Like no one's ever talked about this. And again, it's found footage. So you want to create the illusion that it is real. So he told Anthony, and Anthony kind of connected with Rachel Bolofsky, who runs Screamfest, and they were looking for directors, but I never wanted to I was friends with the guy. I didn't want to be like, hey, what about me? Like, think about me. So he's like, I'll put in a good word for you. And I was like, cool, man, thanks. And then 2 weeks later, I was back in LA and Anthony called me and he was like, hey, he's like, I never thought you were actually going to call Nate and ask him to come help out. That's really awesome of you. And I was like, yeah. I was like, a friend of yours is a friend of mine. Like, I'm more than happy to have him. And he's like, but also I've been talking to you about this documentary for the last 2 months. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize you would have made a documentary. Do you want to talk about this? And I was like, yeah. I was like, I would love to. I'm like, it's my favorite found footage movie of all time. And I think it's, one of the best horror movies of all time. And he's like, why don't you meet with Rachel and I tomorrow for lunch? And I said, sure. And then the next day I showed up with a 40-page outline of what I wanted to do. And they were like, yeah, you're hired. So
was that something you done that night or?
Yeah. I was like, I know exactly how I want to do this. I know what I want to tell. I know how I want to make each scene selection be like the movies. I knew. And the thing is all of Anthony's documentaries prior to that, it felt like when you were watching them, you were watching them from a fan's perspective. It was like, let me see the actors. Let me see the cool, gory stuff. And when I pitched the idea, I wanted to pitch a story that was a story about following someone, a rags to riches story about a guy who had nothing to do in the horror industry that just had an interesting idea. And he went on to make the most successful, not only horror film, but film of all time in terms of return of investment. And so I approached it more from a filmmaker's perspective as opposed to a fan's perspective. And I think that they liked that. And then we pitched it to Paramount and they said no. And then Rachel said that she knows Oren, Katie, and Mika, and they were gracious enough to give me a lot of time. I had 2 interviews with Oren. One was 2 hours, one was 8 hours. And then I sat down with Katie and Mika for 4 hours each, and they gave me a ton of time and I asked them a ton of questions. And then from that, it kind of just went from, we were okay, we were trying to get the rights and we were going to license it and it didn't work out. So we were going to fair use everything. And Anthony's like, we're just going to fair use this all. Let's get as many interviews as we can. And every time we got certain people, other people would reach out to us. And we had a list of people that I wanted to get, but every time we would reach out to people, other people would say yes. And some people would say no. And it kind of trickled in. And then when we landed Jason Blum was like, who don't you have? And we're like, we don't have the head of Paramount at the time that those movies were made. We don't have this person, this producer, this person. And he's like, give me your number. He's like, just keep your phone on. And the next day, all of those people who either we couldn't get or had said no to us said yes. And so we were like, great. And so we were often making the movie. COVID slowed it down a little bit. But by the time we were in post-production, Paramount came back to us and was like, hey, we're making the sixth movie or the seventh movie. Sixth movie? Six, seven. They're like, we're making the seventh movie. We want to release the documentary with the seventh movie. So we were interested in buying it. And that's kind of how it all came together.
That's such a wild story. Is that like a key part, would you say, of working in the industry is just from that story alone, like the amount of connections that are made there and networking and I guess, I don't know, being able to be somewhat of a people person and, offer help or if somebody's looking for maybe a little bit of, a a wing to kind of get under or whatever it might be. Is
I
that
mean,
all part of it?
I'm such a big proponent of helping people and lifting other people up. The horror industry is a very, very small industry. So when you do start meeting people, you do start realizing other people, and it
Yeah.
all kind of comes together. But in film in general, I've met a lot of people that publicly are like, "Oh, I want to help the next generation of filmmakers. I want to keep this story going." But then privately, they're like, "Why would I help them? I'm going to help myself." And so
Mm.
I haven't operated like that, and the people that I work with and the people I know don't operate like that. And I think I've been fortunate enough to work with enough people that like that project was a really, really good example because I know when I was interviewing Oren and I was interviewing Katie and Mika, that first movie, they really, really, really like hold dear. And that's like their baby. And for them to trust me to kind of tell the story that I told and I told them like, I'm not making a movie to like shit on Paranormal Activity or talk about all the bad shit that happened or stuff that no one knew about that kind of was bad and why people don't work in the industry or things like that. It's like my goal of this movie is to lift it up and show people how you guys made something on a nothing budget and like how it changed horror and changed filmmaking. And, they had to trust me and they did. And it turned out good for all of us because I think it got more attention for them and kind of reinvigorated Paranormal Activity when the new one came out because everyone didn't like the new one and they were like the original so much better.
It's funny, right? Because that documentary is the sole reason. So, like, I'm one of those collectors that, like, I have all the movies when they came out on DVD. Then I got them all when they were re-released on Blu-ray. Then there was like, you'd have like this German box set that some company came up with, and then when that new box set came out, and I was like, I really don't need this because I have all these movies so many times. But I was like, it's the easiest way for me to get the documentary at the time because we didn't have any other way. It had to be bought in that, like, big box,
I remember that. Yeah.
and I was like, "I literally don't care. I will just buy the entire set again." I have it sitting on the shelf right there, and I
That's
literally bought it just for that documentary, and that's the stuff I think that the community and things love and adore, especially within horror, is all that extra stuff. All these conversations that we have with people, um, all the little behind the scenes things, the real people behind the stories. Is that something that going forward you'd be open to doing again, or would it have to be involving, a movie or a project that you already love yourself?
It would, I think I'm open to it. I think I'm probably more open to that than doing another found footage movie. I'm definitely open to it, but it has to be the right thing. That guy Nate that I was talking about, he pitched me another idea that I was very interested in. It didn't wind up coming to fruition, but there are a couple other things that I would be interested in doing. But again, I would want to do something that's a little bit unique and a little bit different than a lot of the other stuff that gets done. Because I think at the end of the day, like I love that that film is a piece of the Paranormal Activity world and lore now, but there is a part of me as a filmmaker that when I was making that movie, that I was thinking to myself, like, I'm making a movie about a bunch of people making a movie, and I'd rather be making a movie than doing that. Like, because it feels like I'm just trying to like catch onto their coattails and ride it. And it's like that's not what I was trying to do. I was trying to tell a unique story. And I think yeah, I mean, narrative world of filmmaking is really where I want to live in and where I want to play. But I'm not opposed. Like I said, you never know what the next door, the next meeting, the next person. One of the best things about this industry is you can go 30 years of not really having any form of like independent or commercial success. It just takes one idea, one luck of the draw, one right meeting, one successful movie to kind of change a lot of that. And I think the people who quit are the people who, back to the first question you asked me, are the people who hear those no's or struggle and are like, man, I can't do this anymore. This is too much rejection. Like, I'm out. Like, that's how you don't, like, the people who make it are the people who just keep sticking with it and keep pushing forward.
It's funny. I had a conversation behind the scenes with someone a while back, and they just kept telling me, "It's like, I've just one thing to say to you about anything you want to do. If it's a creative aspect, is you only have to be right once. You only
Right.
have to be right one time. It only has to work one time, and that could change the course of everything. And that should be enough to kind of, I guess, feed that creativity." A couple of quick fire questions before I let you go. Do you have any comfort movies, whether it's horror or otherwise, that you find yourself going back to time and time again?
Yeah. So I would say Nightmare on Elm Street is always my kind of go back to that and live the tortured moment of my mom's boyfriend holding me down. No, so Nightmare on Elm Street, Scream, um, Cabin in the Woods, Shaun of the Dead, Clue. Those are probably like my big ones.
Nice. How do you feel about the all the news and announcements about the new Scream?
I have mixed feelings on it. I love the franchise. I love that Kevin Williamson's a part of it. I love that Nev Campbell's back. But I'm not sure. A lot of movies that have gotten to the seventh, eighth, ninth, and that whatever. It's a lot of times they fall into fanfare, which is, you know, Matthew Lillard just got signed on, so now they're going to show like bring Stu back, and like when it happens in the movie, everyone's going to be like, "Oh shit!" But it's like, I hope the movie itself is scary and good. Like that. That's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping that we don't sacrifice a really good story or a really good script or a really good like kill sequence because we're just adding in all the fanfare of
Yeah.
all of these things.
Going forward, looking to the future, I don't know how much you can talk about what's next for you or what people can look forward to and where they can kind of follow along and support you.
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram. I'm the chosen Joey. I'm I have so we have Hell House LLC Lineage, which is coming out later this year. I have a movie called Imposters that I produced with filmmaker named Caleb Phillips, who's phenomenal. That movie's starring Jessica Roth. That's going to come out either later this year or early next year. And then I have the two movies that I was telling you about. I think one of them is going to be this year and one of them is going to be next year, but who knows? We'll keep our fingers crossed. Maybe both are this year.
Is there anything you're excited for from a fan point of view in the year coming up? Is there anything that sticks out? It doesn't even have to be horror, just in general.
Yeah, I mean, I am very excited to see Mike Flanagan's take on the Dark Tower series. He's one of those filmmakers that I think, to me, kind of stands out as one of the more recent filmmakers that I follow and really love what he does. I'm also I love the team Radio Silence, and I'm really like I don't want so listen. I've fallen into the fact of like the fan part of me wants to see Freddy Krueger over and over and over again. They want to see Ghostface over and over and over again. But the filmmaker in me is like, the more I want to see those things and pay to see those things, the more people like me are not getting opportunities to make original content because we're just making the same things over and over and over again. So, but I love Ready or Not is one of my favorite horror films, and I am very interested to see what they're going to do with the sequel.
If you could work with somebody past or present in any capacity, whether it be a director, a writer, an actor, or whatever it might be, is there somebody that sits atop that list that you would love to work with?
Um, I have a couple answers for you. I think from a filmmaker's perspective, either Blake Edwards or Mel Brooks and Wes Craven. I think all guys that reinvented and did things. The one thing that I love about Wes Craven, and I always say, is Wes Craven made amazing big hit movies and then made really shitty movies. And I think
Mm.
the fact that he made good movies and bad movies, like he's a testament to what it means to be a filmmaker. Is you're never always right. You're not always going to hit success. And so I appreciated that and I loved him. And he's also such a psychological person. And he really, really thought about a lot of the stuff that he did. So he'd probably be the person that I'd want to sit down with. And then on the actor side, I would love to just sit in a room and have a conversation with Leslie Nielsen.
That would be wild. That would be such a conversation. It's funny when you mention Wes. I have spoken to a few people who were quite close to him before he passed and things like that, and they always said like it was so strange. He was such like a gentle guy, kind of behind the scenes, and he had this weird. You're looking at him going, "That's Wes Craven," but in his head, he's like, he's made some movies that were just absolute flops. To just everybody thought they were terrible, and to see him, like they were saying, to see him sit in a room and be like, like half the people that I used to constantly be like getting calls from won't even answer the phone to me now after this last movie,
Right.
which is
Yeah.
a weird concept.
I know I've read a lot of things about it, and I know a lot of people who knew him as well and said that like he did not like that people called him the master of horror. Like he did not feel like he was the master of horror. He didn't like the title. He felt like it was disrespectful to other filmmakers. So, but yeah, I mean, but like you said, a lot of this industry is when you hit once, everyone says you're a genius, you're the best, you're amazing, you're awesome, and then you make a mistake, and everyone's like, you fucking suck, you're the worst filmmaker ever. So. But it takes a special type of person to be able to take all of that.
Yeah, that's unfortunately the world we live in. So final question then is, why horror and what does it mean to you? Like, why do you think that you're constantly, regardless of, I'm sure that there's lots of other projects that you're probably interested in making or would like to dive into, but why do you feel like that's at like I guess the core of what it is that you do?
I think at the end of the day, I think fear is the most interesting emotion to me. I mentioned it earlier, but like making something that goes on a 2D screen and elicits fear in someone is fascinating to me. The psychological, like one of the reasons why I wanted to be in the government, is I wanted to track serial killers and do all that. I'm fascinated by the fact that we are making these movies about people, and you watch those movies and be like, oh my God, that person's terrible. I can't believe that person's doing that. But that person's like your neighbor, or that person's like someone in history. And I'm just fascinated by the fact that I forgot what television show I was watching, but it was something on Netflix. And basically it had a really good quote in it, but it was like, someone said, like, I forgot. It's like, I think it was a quote. It's a quote that's usually about marriage. And it's like, and they turned it into like a serial killer quote. And it's like, everyone has the ability to murder someone. And if they haven't, they just haven't found the right person yet. And it's like we all have the capability to do bad things. We all have the capability to hurt people. We all have the capability of doing these vicious things that are in these movies, but we choose not to. But I'm fascinated by the people who in this world who've chosen to do those things. And I think those stories are stories that really dive into psychology and really make you understand how people can come from the same, like my brother and I came from the exact same place, and we're two completely different people. The nature versus nurture, all of those things are fascinating to me. And I think it elicits conversations, and it gets people like you and me having conversations and talking about things and talking about how people tick. And to me, that's the best thing in the world, is just getting people to understand why people do what they do. And I'm just so continuously, like you can probably hear it the way I'm talking about it, so fascinated by it, so passionate about it. And that's the reason why I want to keep making movies, is for that reason, just to really be able to dive into how people think.
I love when I ask that question, because I feel like I can ask it 100 times the exact same way and get 100 different answers, but they all kind of have little threads that like connect to each other ultimately. I feel like it's part of like a bigger answer that everybody gives.
Yep.
Joe, it's been a pleasure. I could literally keep you here all night if I was being selfish, but I won't do that. I would definitely love to do this again, maybe later in the year once the movie comes out, or maybe you've got some more stuff that you can talk about that's after hitting. Uh,
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. This was awesome, and I enjoyed talking with you. And yeah, please, you have my contact information. I can circle back to you when something's coming out too, so that we can jump on and chat about it.
Yeah, man, for sure. It's been great. It's been a pleasure. I wish you all the best for the rest of the year. And yeah, let's keep in touch, man.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, man.
Cool, man. Thank you. Bye.
Have a good one.
You too.
Bye.